The rain had been falling for hours, drumming softly against the narrow, barred window of cell block C. Inside, two men sat on opposite bunks, the dim yellow light flickering above them. One was tall and wiry, his eyes sharp and restless, like a man who'd spent years turning over the same thought in his mind. The other was quiet, broad-shouldered, and calm in the way that made others uneasy. Their names were Marcus Hale and Devon D. Carter, two inmates who, by chance or fate, had found each other behind the same set of concrete walls. They met 3 years into Marcus's sentence and 5 into Devon's. Both were doing time for crimes they didn't commit, or so they claimed, though few believed them. In prison, everyone was innocent. But beneath the layers of bitterness and routine, something different burned in them, a hunger for justice that had long ago rotted into something darker. Marcus had once been a mechanic, a man with grease on his hands and a family waiting for him after long days. A setup by his boss, who wanted him out of the way for an insurance scam, landed him behind bars. Devon, on the other hand, had been a quiet accountant, convicted after his company pinned a multi-million-dollar fraud on him. The men who'd framed him still lived free, rich, and untouchable. Their paths might never have crossed if not for the fight in the yard one afternoon. A guard had slammed Marcus to the ground after breaking up the scuffle, his ribs cracking under the weight of a baton. Devon had stepped in without hesitation, yanking the guard back just enough to draw the heat away from Marcus. That moment, that flash of loyalty in a place where trust could get you killed, sealed their bond. Over the years, their conversations grew deeper. They spoke in whispers during count time, sharing stories of betrayal, of names and faces that haunted their sleep. And then, one night, as the rain fell much like it did now, Marcus spoke the words that would change both their fates. "What if we didn't just wait?" he said, his voice low. "What if we did something about it?" Devon didn't answer right away. He stared at the floor, at the cracks in the concrete, and thought about the men who'd ruined him. About his mother, who died while he was inside, believing he was guilty. He looked up at Marcus and nodded once. "Then we plan it right. We plan it so no one ever sees it coming." And so, the pact was born. It started with scraps of paper hidden inside old law books, coded notes passed during library duty. Marcus, with his sharp mind for mechanics, began drawing blueprints, not of machines, but of methods. Devon handled logistics, names, addresses, patterns. They mapped out everything they'd need when they got out. Allies, tools, disguises, and the timing of every step. For years, they refined the plan like craftsmen perfecting a masterpiece. They watched, waited, learned. Devon earned a position in the prison's accounting office, gaining access to files, phone lines, and transport schedules. Marcus worked in maintenance, gaining freedom to move around the prison's restricted areas. Together, they became ghosts in their own cage, invisible, underestimated, ignored. When Devon's parole finally came through, Marcus didn't celebrate. He just pressed a folded piece of paper into Devon's palm during their last handshake. "Start with him," Marcus said. "You know where to find him." Devon was released on a gray morning. He didn't look back as the gates clanged shut behind him. Within a month, the first man on their list, a former corporate partner who'd forged Devon's signature, was found dead in his mansion, the scene staged to look like suicide. Marcus got the news from a smuggled newspaper. He smiled for the first time in years. 2 years later, Marcus walked free too, paroled for good behavior. Devon was waiting for him in an old pickup truck parked near the edge of town. He'd grown thinner, quieter, but the fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed. They didn't say much, just nodded and drove. Their revenge unfolded slowly, methodically. Each target was struck down with surgical precision. The corrupt detective who'd falsified evidence, the attorney who'd buried files for a bribe, the businessman who'd made sure Marcus's family never saw a dime. Every act was clean, untraceable. Each scene whispered of a suicide, an accident, or a quiet disappearance. But the final name, the man at the top of the list, wasn't like the others. He was powerful, guarded, and paranoid. Thomas Breyer, the man who'd orchestrated both of their downfalls, now lived behind gated walls with private security and a spotless public image. He was the kind of man who smiled on television while others rotted in cells. For that one, they had to go big. They spent months watching, studying, infiltrating. Devon posed as a financial consultant, slipping through the cracks of Breyer's new ventures. Marcus, ever the builder, constructed what they needed. A device, precise and silent, that would end the man's life without leaving a trace. It was supposed to be perfect, but revenge, like prison, always takes more than it gives. On the night of the final act, Marcus waited in a stolen car near the mansion while Devon went inside. Breyer's office light burned through the rain, a golden square in the dark. Minutes passed, then an hour. Marcus's gut twisted. He grabbed his gun and headed toward the house. Inside, he found chaos, shattered glass, overturned furniture, and Devon lying on the floor, a knife buried deep in his chest. Breyer was gone. Marcus fell to his knees beside his friend, his hands trembling. Devon's lips moved, barely forming words. "Finish it," he whispered, before the light faded from his eyes. Marcus didn't hesitate. He tracked Breyer through the storm, following him to his car, to the lonely road that cut through the woods. When the headlights flared, Marcus stepped out from the dark, soaked and silent, and pulled the trigger. One shot. Just one. When the police found the car hours later, it had crashed into a ditch, engine smoking. Inside were two bodies, one dead from a gunshot, the other from the crash. The papers called it a murder-suicide. No one knew the truth. No one knew about the pact. But somewhere, deep in the prison archives, an old law book still sits on a shelf, its pages hollowed out, filled with faded notes and hand-drawn maps. A whisper of two men who refused to die forgotten, who turned their cage into a workshop of vengeance. And though the rain eventually stopped, the legend of the Prison Pact never did. Even after the papers stopped printing the story and the headlines faded from memory, whispers about the Prison Pact continued to circulate, first among inmates, then among guards, and finally, among those who'd once been part of the same system that created Marcus Hale and Devon Carter. In prison, stories never die. They grow, change, twist, becoming both warning and legend. A year after the supposed murder-suicide, a new inmate arrived at Coldridge Penitentiary, a lean, nervous man with shifty eyes who claimed he'd once worked for Thomas Breyer. He'd been arrested on unrelated fraud charges, but when the older inmates heard his name, they began to murmur. That night, during lights out, someone slid a folded piece of paper under his cell door. On it, written in faded ink, were 4 words. "The pact never ends." He tore the note apart and tried to forget it. But over the next few months, strange things began to happen, quiet, deliberate things. His commissary money disappeared from the system. His requests for transfer were accidentally denied. One night, the guards found him hanging in his cell, though no one could explain how the camera had gone dark for exactly 7 minutes before his death. Some said it was just prison karma, that the man had it coming. Others swore that Marcus and Devon had more allies than anyone ever realized. Because the truth was, the pact had never been just between 2 men. Back when they were both inside, Marcus and Devon had shared their story with others, the ones who'd been framed, betrayed, and silenced by the same kind of corruption. Men who'd lost families, reputations, and futures to crooked deals and forged evidence. They called themselves the Chain, a quiet network of inmates who believed justice didn't stop at parole. They shared coded messages hidden in library books, scratched into cell walls, whispered during chapel time. Every man in the chain carried one rule, one act of revenge owed to another. If one fell, the others carried it on. After Marcus and Devon's deaths, the remaining members picked up where they left off. The first to act was a man named Luis Ortega, a lifer who'd worked beside Marcus in maintenance. Using the skills Marcus had taught him, he sabotaged the warden's car, nearly killing the man who'd pocketed state funds meant for inmate health care. The warden retired quietly after that, his nerves shot, his silence bought. Another member, known only as Reed, was paroled 6 months later. He disappeared into the world and resurfaced in small ways: a fire at a judge's vacation home, a hidden run involving a retired detective who once forged evidence. Each event was ruled unfortunate, unrelated, tragic coincidence. But to those who knew the legend, the pattern was unmistakable. By the time 5 years had passed, the Prison Pact had evolved from a single revenge story into an underground myth. It became a symbol, a tale inmates told in hushed tones to remind each other that no injustice goes unanswered. Some believed Marcus and Devon's spirits still haunted Coldridge, guiding those who were wronged. Others thought the chain had grown beyond prison walls, that ex-cons on the outside carried out justice in secret, bound by loyalty and vengeance. And yet, amid the shadows, one detail remained unspoken, a mystery even among those who claimed to know everything about the pact. When detectives combed through Marcus's apartment after his death, they found a small lockbox beneath the floorboards. Inside were letters, photographs, and a single USB drive. It contained blueprints, lists of names, and an unfinished plan titled simply, Phase 2. The authorities dismissed it as paranoid rambling. But the names on that list weren't random. They were politicians, judges, prosecutors. Men and women still alive, still powerful. Months later, one of them, a retired senator with ties to Breyer's company, vanished without a trace while vacationing overseas. His yacht washed ashore days later, empty. The police called it an accident. The press barely covered it. But in the dark corners of the internet, on hidden forums and prison chat boards, a message appeared. Phase 2 complete. No one knew who posted it. No one ever found out. Years later, when a journalist tried to write a book about the case, she received an anonymous email with an attachment, an old photograph. It showed two men sitting at a prison table under harsh fluorescent light. Marcus and Devon, both smiling. On the back, scrawled in rough handwriting, were the words, "Justice doesn't die. It waits." The journalist never published the book. She quit her job, moved across the country, and changed her name. But the story still lives, whispered in prison yards, shared among the desperate and the broken, told as both warning and promise. Somewhere out there, someone is still keeping the pact. And every time another powerful man falls under mysterious circumstances, someone remembers those two inmates who started it all, the men who turned their punishment into purpose, their anger into legacy. Because revenge, once born in a cell, doesn't fade with time. It grows. It spreads. It becomes immortal. The Prison Pact lives on.